So this presentation is on fatigue and recovery, and the first thing I'm going to cover is fatigue. So fatigue is defined as levels of extreme tiredness, and fatigue can be caused mainly by one thing, which is lactic acid built up in the muscles. But there are three different types of fatigue, and that's local is one, general is the second one, and chronic is the third one. Local is located in specific muscles. So if you're doing lots and lots of push-ups, then you're going to feel much more fatigue in your biceps and triceps. General is when you have been doing lots of exercise for a long period of time and you just feel general fatigue, so all over your muscles, all over your body. That can come from things such as a marathon or just a training session. The last one is the chronic one, and that is to do with more emotional and social well-being. That can just be when you're just tired from, lack of sleep, not eating enough, not drinking enough, and so that's what chronic is. There are different things that can cause fatigue. As I said, lactic acid is one of them. Stimulants can be the second one. Core temperature, pain, hypoxia, experience, motivation, and emotions. So certain stimulants can cause fatigue, such as different drugs you have to take that can cause a lot of fatigue as a side effect. Your core temperature, if that drops or rises more than what it should be, then that can cause fatigue as well. Pain, if you have constant pain such as backache or a headache, that can cause fatigue quite quickly. Hypoxia can also cause fatigue in multiple ways. Experience, motivation is a big one that can cause fatigue, and emotions as well, as I said before with the chronic. So the second one here we're on to is the oxygen deficit graph. This is mostly about recovery of fatigue. There are different components to this. This is a graph to show high intensity exercise, but short duration. And as it shows here, there is an oxygen deficit. Oxygen deficit is the temporary shortage of oxygen during exercise unless there is 100% energy contribution of the aerobic system. Oxygen deficit happens when during exercise when there's a lack of oxygen during your exercise, and this relates to the EPOC here, which is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, and this comes in two components, which is a fast component and a slow component. The fast component can be also known as a lactic or fast recovery, and this is your VO2, which is your maximum amount of oxygen that is consumed, and this can be used for the resaturation of myoglobin, the resaturation of hemoglobin, and it can also be used to resynthesize ATP stores and PC stores. Your ATP and PC stores deplete as you exercise, and this is just a way for them to, increase again. There's lots of different. There's also metabolic needs in here. Around by the EPOC that can also be in there as well. And this can also be, this can also be linked to the different exercises that we've got. We've got a 100-meter and a javelin here, and Casey et al. Said that during high intensity, low duration exercise, muscle PC levels can be completely depleted, as I said before, and during a 100-meter and a javelin, which is very short intensity, very short duration and a very high intensity, the short bursts of exercise, the PC levels will be completely depleted, and they would need to be resynthesized again, which is through the recovery phase epoch. The myoglobin combines with the oxygen ready to take oxygen to the mitochondria, which is another thing that the epoch or recovery stage is used for, and that happens when exercise begins, and that needs approximately 0.5 liters of oxygen for 100% recovery and can take between 1 to 2 minutes. So the next one we have here is the moderate intensity and moderate duration. And as you can see in the middle, there is a oxygen consumption during exercise. There's a lactic, the fast component, the metabolic needs, and the lactacid slow component. This is very similar to the other graph, but as you can see, the oxygen deficit is much smaller. And this is just because the intensity is not as high, so there's not as much oxygen needed. But this one links more to the lactacid or slow recovery, which is used for the removal of carbon dioxide, the removal of lactic acid, and that's oxidized to remove it, and the replenishment of muscle glycogen stores. Glycogen is the fuel used in moderate duration exercise because it just gives more energy than the ATP, which that in turn gives you longer lasting energy. However, many athletes try to train to be able to use fats instead of glycogen, just because the glycogen is very important in exercise. It gives you a lot of energy, and so if they can train to use fats instead, then that's usually what happens. The slow component can take between 1 to 2 hours by buffering the lactic acid or just removing the lactic acid. The lactate is oxidized to CO2, H2O, glucose, glycogen, and protein. And that is how the removal works of that. And as it is over here as well, if I can find it, there it is. The lactacid or fast recovery takes 2 to 3 minutes and 3 to 4 liters of oxygen to complete this. And the fast component is used for the resynthesizing ATP or PC stores and replenishing myoglobin levels. And this leads to faster and deeper breathing after exercise. It also links to the CO2 removal, as it did over in the second one. What's happened? As it did in the second one, the slow component here, the removal of CO2, and that's is done by increased cardiac output, and ventilation helps to remove the high levels of the carbon dioxide, and 70% of that is carried in the plasma as carbonic acid. The 23% is carried by the hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin, and 7% is then dissolved in the plasma. And this links to the Cori cycle as well, where it's all taken from the liver, and it's just what happens after lactic acid and how it can be used as a fuel again, and how it actually becomes useful. And 65% of lactic acid is converted to pyruvate, and that enters the Krebs cycle and is therefore used as a fuel, and is ultimately converted to carbon dioxide and water. And then 5% is converted into glucose in the liver, which again links back to the Cori cycle. There's lots of things that people can do to aid recovery. In here it says in the fast recovery for the epoch, the high carbohydrate diet speeds up the glycogen recovery process. So that's why lots of athletes eat a very heavily carbohydrate diet. And fast glycolytic fibers can be restored faster than the slow oxidative fibers. So that's another point to help with the recovery. However, some athletes who train quite a lot in the recovery phase may come across something known as DOMS, which is delayed onset of muscle soreness, and that's caused by the myofibril tears from eccentric or unaccustomed exercise. And it can lead to inflammatory response such as swelling, altered muscle, firing patterns, and that's caused by a lot of overtraining. Um, Overtraining is exercise at a level beyond normal physical tolerance limits when the body is unable to recover adequately during rest periods. And this can cause a lot of fatigue um, and may take a while for the athlete to recover after that, which may lead to DOMS. The physiological effects of overtraining is basically the endocrine system becomes imbalanced, and hormones control the functions, and hormone production might be inadequate or excessive, which can usually explain why people's moods get a little bit low after doing constant training, and that's why that can lead to chronic fatigue. There's also many things that overtraining can affect, such as your performance. It can lead to poor or inconsistent standard. It can also lower your immune system if you train too much, because your body is not allowed that time to recover sufficiently, and you're far more susceptible to an injury. And overtraining is mostly linked to chronic fatigue because it can lead to poor sleep and have a bigger psychological impact on you. It can also lead to a general fatigue as well, because you'll be using all your muscles quite a lot, and that's not something that should, ever be considered as a good thing. So over here, yeah, as it says, the and your motivation as well will also lack quite a lot, and the emotions will also decrease. For something that is a low intensity and long duration, such as I guess you could use a marathon. I'd say that's more of a high intensity, but for argument's sake, let's just say a marathon. You're far more likely to feel more general fatigue, and your recovery would probably take a lot longer after doing something like that. You'd probably have to use the slow component of the EPOC and the lactacid slow recovery, which can take up to 2 hours to a few days, because you have to replenish the muscle glycogen stores, which takes a lot longer than just replenishing or resynthesizing your ATP stores. And that's about it.